This is collaborative code with React and NX. And my name is Brandon Roberts. I give you the pitch that I normally give, Brandon Roberts. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon T. Roberts, where I tweet out gifts, I talk about sports, and I have fun in general there. So definitely follow me there. I am a developer advocate at Narwhal, where we help companies build applications at scale using the Monorepo. I'm also a Google developer expert in Angular, which just means I've been around the community for a while and I've contributed some things there. So if you have any Angular questions also, or web development, I can probably give you some help there. I'm also a maintainer on the NGRX project, which is a set of reactive libraries for Angular. But like I said, this is a React talk, so it's a little different. But like I said, we have some commonality there. So for this talk, I want to talk about monorepos and kind of what the benefits are, and even some of like the pitfalls that you run into when you are getting started with monorepos. Talk about NX and what NX is and how it drives monorepos, and talk about how this promotes an environment of collaborative code when you're working inside of a monorepo and working with multiple applications and libraries. So let's talk about monorepos, just get kind of level set what those are. Monorepo is a single repository, usually hosted in Git, but it could be other version control systems. It holds all the source code for your multiple applications and libraries. And this could be just one application that has many libraries, or a different set of applications that have libraries. You may have a shared component library, and any tooling that goes along with that, including scripts and documentation and more. So what are some of the benefits of a monorepo that you normally get out of having things in separate repos? Shared code and visibility. You get to reuse validation code, UI components, and types across the code base. You have atomic changes to where you can make changes across different boundaries of the application without coordinating these changes across multiple repos. Developer mobility, and this kind of gets into developer experience, where you have a consistent way of doing certain tasks for inside of a monorepo, such as building and testing applications, even though you may be using different tools and technologies. And depending on how you set this up, you can have a single set of dependencies, and that allows you to have all your third-party dependencies on the same version, reducing some of those inconsistencies between applications, and keeps these applications that aren't actively developed up to date. There are also some pitfalls with monorepos that tend to give people a different opinion about them, but one thing about those is just copying code into the single repository. As you mentioned, you could have multiple applications and libraries in your monorepo, and you're just kind of shifting those all into one place. Not sharing these code across applications, and this is when you have libraries or maybe a component library that you're not taking full advantage of there. Inconsistent tooling, which could impact your developer experience with, just like I said, ad hoc scripts. If your package JSON scripts are getting out of control, that could be a source of confusion there, or impact your developers there. And one of the biggest things is running every test or every build or every task on every change to a repository. There's some, and even if you have a monorepo, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be shipped at the same time. So you could have applications that aren't impacted by changes, but if you're running tests against everything, that impacts you, and you can see increases in CI times as a result of that. And so, as I mentioned before, NX is all about monorepo. So what is NX? NX is a smart, extensible build framework that drives monorepos, that gives you more than just co-location of shared code. Has a powerful CLI that kind of works at a higher level of what your framework or your stack of choices to let you kind of operate in a consistent way. and also integrates with modern tooling that you're used to with web development across many different areas. So how does NX work across these areas where you're working around these different applications libraries? And we'll talk kind of around the mental model of NX, and it has a few things that kind of give with that. One of those is a project graph for code analysis, a task graph for running targets. It's metadata driven, and this goes into the tooling that you use with NX, and affected commands that help you isolate which given things are impacted by a change, and computation caching, which also caches things that are tasks that you've already run where you don't have to run those tasks again. So looking at the project graph, your Monorepo in general has a graph of all of its changes, the applications and libraries that are in it. So you would have, if you're building a stack based on React, you would have that at the kind of at the bottom of it'd be one of your bottommost dependencies. So you have a project graph that is used to reflect the source code in your repository and all the external dependencies like React or Angular or even Webpack and those things. So you have these multiple applications that help with that, along with libraries that you have in this repository that you're wanting to share across these applications. So the project graph, like it's built up these application and libraries and some configuration that helps with identifying where these dependencies are. So there's a project graph that gets cached every time it performs some analysis, and it looks at the projects that are in your repository. And if you have two applications in a library, and you add another library, so that process happens each time. So it analyzes those dependencies in your Monorepo to make sure you're always up to date and can give you an accurate picture of that. Next, we're going to talk about the task graph. NX uses the project graph to create this task graph. So as I mentioned before, anytime you run a task, NX creates this graph based on from the projects that are in there and executes those tasks in that graph. So all these tasks don't depend on each other and can be run in parallel. And here I have two apps and one library that are all in the same repository, as I mentioned before, but they don't have any dependencies on each other, so they can be run in parallel. NX also integrates with tools. So it's driven by metadata, which is just a set of JSON data that has things like default values and validations, auto completions that are defined in schema instead of code. So if you think about how to expand this across different ecosystems, you don't want to have cases for different things. You want everything to kind of be driven by this metadata. And NX itself uses this metadata for things like GitHub integrations, for tooling there, also used by IDEs such as WebStorm and VS Code. And this just shows you one tool that NX has to help with when you're developing multiple React applications called NX Console, that it builds on top of these generators or things that it has and this is just NX Console is just a GUI for NX that helps you extend there. And I mentioned before, when you're dealing with a Monorepo, you want to have standardization across, even if you're dealing with multiple stacks or multiple technologies, and using common commands help you in that way. And NX has a few of these. So like generate, where you want to generate a new application. And this could be for, like I said, your ecosystem of choice, whether it be React, Next.js, Gatsby, React Native, all those things. Same with serving an application. This is just spinning up your web application or even your Next.js API. Talk about building, testing, and linting your applications there. And this is also customizable. So if you think about packaged JSON scripts, you usually have to prefix them with some common conventions, like a colon in between each word for each application. But you can have some consistency there, even if you wanted to have a deploy command. there. Also, we talked about modern tooling such as TypeScript, Storybook, Jest, Cypress, and ESLint. And all these things are integrated out of the box. So you don't have to spend time setting up those setting up those tasks. As I talked about effective commands, as your workspace grows, retesting or rerunning tasks based on all these projects is going to slow down just your overall velocity. And the effective commands help you with that. So if you look at this graph here, we have changes to application 1, but based on the project graph, it's the only thing affected by those changes. So application 1 would be the only thing that needs to be retested. So if we look at something that's common between the two tasks, such as library 1, then we're going to have both application 1 and 2 being retested, or whatever the task may be. And you can see how this could be efficient when you have multiple applications that in a monorepo that you're sharing code between. Also talked about effective commands as one way to drive your monorepo, whether you have multiple apps, where you're only running tasks based on the impacted projects. Computation caching also takes that a step further because it has context about what you ran on a given task. And this is also against the current set of changes in the code base. So this takes like the command that you ran and the current state or context of your monorepo, which could span different multiple places, and also some environmental information, and uses that to build this cache of tasks that you've run. So computation caching is local first. So if you run that cache, run the same task or computation twice on one machine, you get that local cache. That cache can also be distributed to other, if we take that cache and put it in a more central place, you can share that cache with other machines. So you have access to that cache. Now, when someone else brings down changes that they've already completed, they get that cache, and other machines that you have also can take advantage of that. And this cache extends to your entire organization, as each machine can read and write from that cache. I mentioned before, ecosystems. React is one ecosystem that we support as a first-party ecosystem. Also support Angular and Node if you're using just Node or Express, or Node or Next.js apps. As I mentioned before, with Next.js is also has first-party support there. So if you think about things like automatic upgrades, if you're wanting to keep every application on the same version of a particular version of React, and we also have migrations there that'll help upgrade you to the latest version. If you're managing multiple of these projects, it simplifies that. NX is also extensible. So it's not just the core of NX that helps there drive that monorepo that you can use with different ecosystems, but plugins that help you with that. And plugins are just NPM packages that have generators that you can use to scaffold code, and executors that help you run tasks like serving an app or building an application. So generators help with, like I said, automation, vanilla JavaScript. They are used to create and update files and modify configuration, delete, and you can apply these to applications and libraries, components, and more. Same with executors. These define actions that you can perform on a task, such as serving, building, testing, and linting. So you have these consistent way to run these across different React applications and libraries. So how does, we talked about collaborative code, and the biggest thing that you want to promote in a monorepo is being able to collaborate across different primary areas. And we do this by generating in a consistent way, being able to reuse code and rerun or not rerun code. So just to get started, how you would use NX, you would create a new use this command, create NX workspace, to create a new workspace there. This will give you a pretty standard application. And as I serve the app, this is what you would see in the browser. So now you can generate other pages for this dashboard application, such as the home page, and also generate a library of shared components to use across one or many applications. Generating components is done in the same way. You generate a footer component inside the shared library. And after using that footer in the dashboard, you can take a look at the dependency graph, which is always up to date, that shows you what the dependencies are there. And like I said, we're talking about Next.js, but also has support for vanilla React applications. So React applications and Next applications can be used within your workspace to reuse that code. So if we reuse the same footer across the Next.js and a React application, using the updated dependency graph, you can see where those dependencies lie and what things depend on the relationships between these two apps. And then I mentioned before about computation caching. This is just an example of running a test against the blog application or the dashboard or however these things are run. So we have some output from this particular task and we're running a unit test for that. And if we run that same test again, we get that cached output instantly without having to actually run that task again, because we are context aware of how those things interact together or what the inputs and outputs were for that task. And it can also, any artifacts that were produced from there would be reproduced instantly. So to recap, talked about monorepos, kind of benefits of why people love them, and also pitfalls of why people don't have a good experience with them. Talked about what NX is at a high level of how it helps you drive this monorepo, and also talked about collaborating within a monorepo using shared code, only running what you need to run, being able to use different tools in a consistent way, and have that span across many developers and applications. Thank you for allowing me to give this talk. And you can, like I said, find me on Twitter if you want to talk more about NX and monorepos.